Okay, so welcome to Working Memory Professional Development. I just want to give you a little background on myself. I have my master's in reading that I got through at Concordia Walden University, and with that I got my Reading 316 license. About last May, when I found out I got this job, I decided to go back to Concordia to get my master's in administration of reading, and that's how I will get my 317 license. So currently I'm in an internship and doing a case study at the same time. So I'm required to give a professional development in front of professionals. So thank you for being my professionals today, as that's why it's going to be videotaped, because it's going to get submitted into Concordia. So, and I know some of you in here have gone to Concordia, so it's a very great school. So thank you for being here. I believe that working memory, the more that I dived into it, is like the hidden driver or the working driver behind getting our students to grow in reading. So here is a little bit about how my case study was created. So when you decide for a case study, you have to come up with like a question that you have like in your own practice as you are growing. So my one question that I started off by asking myself is, for my struggling readers, is there more that I can do for them besides the systematic, explicit reading instruction that we give them through our SIPS program? So what other barriers are these learners having besides struggling in reading? So that led me to think about, if students are receiving this structured literacy instruction, why are they still experiencing difficulty with fluency and comprehension? Like our tier 3 students, they're getting everything that they're supposed to, but why are they still struggling? Why are there still barriers? So then I decided to dig into our diagnostics data. I don't like giving assessment and not knowing the reason behind it. So I knew about learning comp, listening comp. We give that to understand if a student can comprehend orally. We give spelling to see if they can encode. But then I thought about RAN. I was like, what is the purpose of RAN? RAN was new to me this year, and it really interested me. Why does it matter if a student can list all of these numbers and how quickly? What was the purpose behind that? So then that's when I dug into RAN a little bit more, which then led to the question of could these cognitive processes, such as our working memory, influence how effectively students can apply and decode and comprehend? So that's where my case study was born, all from Abigail presenting RAN to us and me wondering what was the purpose of this diagnostic assessment. So my case study question was, how might limited working memory affect a student's ability to blend sounds, decode multi-syllabic words, or integrate information across sentences? So I really wanted to hone in on our working memory barrier, which I know that a lot of our students have that we may not know. So that was how this case study was born. While during this presentation, I thought maybe it would be nice for you guys to have a few questions think about while I'm presenting. So have you ever analyzed and used RAN data to create a plan to support a high-risk student? I know that we all administer it, and we all put the some risk, low risk, and high risk into our diagnostic spreadsheet, but then have we ever done anything more with it? Made a plan with it, identified our high-risk students, and think about how can we help those students who are high risk with their processing. But then I also thought of this question, how is this assessment different than our letter naming fluency that we give to our kindergartners? And there's actually more differences between those two than I thought. So I hope with these two questions, we're gonna have a little activity at the end, because I hope that you guys can at least bring one thing back with you into your reading intervention from this professional development, so it wasn't a wasted time for you guys. So I just hope you can at least learn one thing from me today. During a case study, you first have to start off with doing lots of research. So I did a lot of research with Kilpatrick. He is very inspiring with his articles about working memory and how it's connected to reading development.
Mm-hmm.
So this is
Virgil, I don't know.
Oh yeah.
That's weird.
So of all the research I compiled about working memory to design this case study. So here's just like an overview of my research. So first of all, I wanted to dig into RAN. I know we all know that RAN is a rapid automatized naming, that they time how long that they can name pictures, how long it takes to name some letters and then numbers. But when you dig more into it, we learned that it measures how quickly a student can retrieve and say familiar symbols. So when you give this, it has to be something they're familiar with. If they're not familiar with it, it's not actually testing their working memory, because working memory is about pulling out that information that they already know. That's why we can time their speed retrieval of sounds or words from their very own memory. And it measures how efficiently the brain stores information in their mind. That's another reason why it has to be familiar. So we can't just give them a RAN on a bunch of like little pictures that they have no idea what those are. That is why, like, if they can get discontinued and move on to a different assessment, like maybe if they don't know pictures like the sun, the shoe, maybe they know their letters. If they don't know that, maybe they know their numbers. So RAN involves several cognitive processes that work together in our brain. It's the speed of retrieval, it's the automatic access to our stored knowledge in our long-term memory, and then it's the ability to scan visual information quickly with our eyes. So it's like, how quickly can our brain retrieve it, see it, and then verbalize it. So it's like that whole entire brain pathway. So it's about a coordination and connection between what the students see and how quickly they can say it out loud. And if that processing is slow, it affects everything within their reading. So that is how it's connected to reading. So that's how there is a vicious cycle of limited RAN. Limited RAN, I don't like to use the word like weak RAN or slower RAN. It's just limited at this moment in time, and it can be built up. So it means they have slow retrieval speed, which then means that you have limited word recognition, which means that when you have slower retrieval speed, it creates a higher demand on your working memory to come up with these words, which then reduces your fluency and comprehension, because your working memory is just focusing on naming those letters and not on the speed. So this is the cycle that our struggling readers are continually in, and one of the barriers. So then I'm like, okay, well, we're gonna have to address this barrier that some of our readers have. And the students who score high risk on RAN, how can we remove this barrier or support this barrier in their reading? So after I dug a lot into RAN, I asked myself then, what exactly is working memory? So working memory, from Kilpatrick, he likes to nickname it the brain's mental workshop. It's where everything is working in present time. It's not your long-term memory, it's like what is going in your mind right now. So it allows us to keep information active in our brain while we process it. It's our processing skills. It allows us to hold ideas so we can think about them. So like a reader can remember the beginning of the sentence as they finish the sentence. Some of our readers can't remember the beginning of the sentence as they finish it, because their working memory is working so hard on decoding those words. Well, if they can't remember the beginning of the sentence, then they have no meaning to what they are reading. So it allows us to store and manipulate information at the same time, which is exactly what we need to be reading. But it only holds information for a short period of time. So I'm gonna also give you like a fun fact about how many times do we need to process it in our working memory to get it into our long-term memory. And that is what will make the students more fluent. So when we have limited working memory, this slide highlights some of the common challenges students experience when they have limited working memory. So the students who would be identified as high risk on the RAN assessment or even some risk, right? So students will struggle with multi-step directions. They remember maybe the first step that was told to them because then they can't think about anything else. Or a lot of the times they just remember the last thing that was said to them with multi-steps and they don't do anything before. So these students, like when you're working with them in reading intervention, it's very important that you only give them one task to do at a time because they can't hold all that information within their working memory. And like this will affect everything that they do during the school day. And I guess it would be important for their like homeroom teacher to know like they have high risk working memory. This child can only handle having one direction given to them at a time. Otherwise, their working memory gets overwhelmed and they shut down. So like that's just something good for like all of our teachers to know. So side note, that's why I told my teachers whose students were identified as high risk after learning this, just so that they know that they might need supports with giving them just one direction at a time within the classroom. Students find it difficult for them to retain information while reading. So this is working memory works hand in hand with comprehension. If the working memory is all demanded on decoding, no comprehension is happening. So the task requires a lot of mental effort, which quickly overloads the working memory, and this causes the brain to be less focused, become frustrated, and disengaged in task. So maybe our students who struggle in reading when they get frustrated, it's because their working memory is overloaded. So how can we support that working memory so that they don't feel overloaded all the time? So I then did some research with the psychologist Alan Badley. He described working memory as having multiple components. There's 3 components to our working memory. There's the listening, the phonological loop that holds and processes the spoken language and connects it to our written language. Then there's the visual spatial sketch pad that manages everything that we see with our eyes for visual. And then the most interesting one that I found was this central executive. This is what directs attention and coordinates our processing. And I thought this was pretty cool because our guidance counselor at Jefferson actually started doing executive functioning skills groups, and this aligns completely with this central executive within the working memory. So we and Miss Hawley, her name's Alyssa Hawley, actually had a conversation about how the students who struggle with executive functioning are the same students who scored high risk on their RAN assessment. So there was that direct correlation between the two. So we found that very interesting. So she was actually like doing working memory intervention without even realizing it with my students who scored high risk on RAN. So that was pretty cool after having that conversation. So in reading, we do the phonological loop, and central executive are very important because that is how we process the information we read. So now, how is this connected to reading? So David Kilpatrick states that this is connected to reading in 3 different ways. It's connected with word level reading, it's connected to our fluency and our decoding. So the most powerful thing we can do for our working memory intervention is give strong phonemic awareness, systematic phonics, and fluency building. And if you really think about that, that's exactly what we do within our SIPS intervention. Within our SIPS intervention, we have phonemic awareness as our warm-up. We have systematic phonics that we work on within, and we build with fluency with our passages. So, but then it's just like, how can we integrate working memory into the already known research-based intervention that we give to our students? This is where I have the fun fact about how many connections and how many pathways do we have to create for students in order to get it into their long-term memory. So, explicit decoding with orographic mapping for typical readers, a reader who is an average student, only needs 1 to 4 exposures of mapping to get that into their long-term memory. Then for the struggling readers that we work with, it takes up to 40 to 60 exposures. So that means that they have to be able to say the sound, they have to be able to recognize it visually, to build it, to write it 40 to 60 times to get that word or that phonics part they're learning into their long-term memory. But when the instruction is not explicit or not systematic or not done with fidelity, it will take over 150 exposures. So that is why it is so important that within our practice that we are always explicit, direct, systematic, and building and doing it with the fidelity, because then they would need it to see it 150 times or more. So I thought that was kind of crazy that no wonder why our students we work with are struggling. A typical student only needs to learn it 1 to 4 times, where our students need to learn it 40 to 60 times, if not more. So then breaking these 3 components up even further, our word level reading, which we all know very well, is decoding, right? This is what we do every single day. It's how we can hold an individual sound in our memory, then blend those sounds to connect together to make a word that has meaning. Now, students who have limited working memory can forget those earlier sounds before they even finishing decoding the word. So for example, like my tier 3 student I have right now will take his last sound that he says and make that the initial sound, because he has very, very high risk working memory. So he just puts the last sound he says and thinks that's the beginning sound of the word. So he loses track of those sounds really regularly. So also, for example, when you're decoding a multisyllabic word, like with my 5th graders, when you are saying fantastic, right? A lot of times that they forget the first 2 syllable parts. So weak working memory makes this cognitively overwhelming for students. That's why we need to build their working memory so that they can hold the multisyllabic words, so they can hold all the sounds in a word to be able to blend it together. So that is how working memory is very important to our word level reading. Working memory is also important for our reading fluency, right? It's the second component, because this is how students are able to phrase, they're able to attend to the meaning, and they're able to integrate ideas across sentences, even paragraphs. So like right now, I'm having my students read a lot of passages in the challenge. I give them passages so I have control over what they're reading at their reading level. And a lot of times they completely forget what's even said in the first few paragraphs, and they continually have to go back in there to find that evidence all the time. Well, that's just because their working memory is being overloaded with solving those multisyllabic words, and so they have a hard time holding the meaning throughout the text. So if the decoding is not automatic, working memory becomes overloaded, and then they can no longer comprehend the text. That is why in SIPS intervention it says repeated readings, reading it 3 times every single day, because then the whole purpose of reading is understanding, and they can't understand without those multiple readings. Then the third component that working memory affects is reading comprehension. So working memory is essential for comprehension because students must be able to remember what they read in previous sentences, putting sentences together, putting paragraphs together, making inferences, and monitoring the understanding. If you think about that, as a struggling reader, that's a lot. I was a struggling reader, and that idea almost was like impossible for me in middle school. So I probably had high risk working memory. I didn't know it at the time, but thinking about it, I probably did because I was so focused on reading the words, I could never understand what I was reading. And that really made my content areas hard for me, especially science, lots of new words, right? So that really makes me think about how my fifth graders feel, right, within science and social studies. If they're focusing so hard on solving those multi-syllabic words, their brain is so overloaded that that's why they struggle in their content areas as well. So a reader with limiting working memory may understand a sentence individually, but they can't understand it as a whole. This is why some students can decode accurately but still have difficulty with comprehension. So why does this matter to us, right? Well, we are the reading interventionist teachers. So our job is to take the overloading barrier from decoding the word level so that they can comprehend within their classroom. So David Kilpatrick also emphasized that automatic word recognition reduces the cognitive load. So hopefully with us, we can give them the strategies to decode, to take off that feeling over barrier in their mind so that they can succeed in all their core classes. So when our foundational skills are strong, they use less working memory as needed, and then they have more capacity for the comprehension. So as a reading teacher, right, this connects directly to our work. So it focuses on our sight words for instant retrieval. So thinking about that fun fact I gave earlier, that means students need to see and build. That's why we have in SIPS, we have them spell the word every single time, because they need to make that pathway for that sight word 40 to 60 times in order to get in their long-term memory for us. And I thought that was just good for me to know, because like going through the sight words can seem so tedious during SIPS and spelling it out every single time, but it is very imperative to our struggling readers so that they can take it from their working memory into their long-term memory. So then it directly teaches manipulating sounds into spoken words. It encourages practice to develop speed, accuracy, and expression. And then we can teach them chunking, visuals, and guided practice. Even like finding those chunks, like certain, like the endings, they still need to do that work 40 to 60 times. So to learn the ing ending, they need to be able to build that 40 to 60 times in order to get that into their long-term memory. So, also I do have a student with dyslexia, and dyslexia, working memory, dyslexia cannot be cured, right? And working memory will not cure it, but it will help support our students with dyslexia. So it helps with getting their attention, it helps with their processing and their executive functioning, because with students with dyslexia, they struggle in all of these areas. So in my case with my dyslexia student, working memory supports them and is helpful, but it does not cure them. But I did want to like just put this in here, knowing that this work does help and support our students with dyslexia. So then my key takeaways is building working memory doesn't improve reading ability, but it influences reading efficiency. So the goal is to reduce the need for working memory and decoding so that it can be used for other areas as comprehension. So that was my main takeaway. So then that's where my case study was born, from this research of how can I take that load off of my students from decoding so that they can read with a purpose. Like I feel like a lot of my students didn't understand that they read for a purpose. They read to learn, they read for passion, they read for fun, to enjoy a story. So I did a case study intervention. So with this research, I decided to do a working memory intervention that integrated all of these working memory skills. along with SIPs, kind of, no, not really SIPs, I like created my own stuff, but it had like the same routine as SIPs did, cause I didn't wanna change it up too much. So, within my working memory group, I knew that I wanted to strengthen my phonological processing, I wanted to increase automaticity for my students, I wanted to reduce the cognitive load, and I wanted to teach strategies to help make our memory, working memory, stronger. So I started with a 10-week cycle. Each day was 30 minutes long. I met with them from 2:15 to 2:45 every single day. It was a total of 4 students. I identified these 4 students with 3 data points. RAN was the #1 indicator of high risk, ORF was an indicator, and listening comprehension was an indicator. But it was kind of interesting because they were all like related, like these 4 students who were high risk in RAN also scored really low on their listening count. Also, all 4 of these students were 3rd graders, because I was like, okay, these students are in 3rd grade and they're still at like the 2 percentile. Like obviously they have more barrier to their learning than just not understanding how to decode. Like there's another barrier that they're experiencing. So then it was a 30-minute block. This is how I broke up my block. The first 5 minutes was the phoneme manipulation warm-up. Next 10 minutes was explicit decoding word work. The next 10 minutes is the fluency practice, repeated readings. And the last 5 minutes was the sentence recall and comprehension stretch. So this does align with the SIPS routine because a lot of them were also like in my SIPS group. So I kind of wanted to, so I met with them twice a day. So I wanted to keep the routine kind of similar. But like the SIPS intervention is research-based and aligns with what they need. So it was high structured, high repetitive, and I gave them immediate feedback. I integrated a lot of working memory into like the sentence recall comprehension stretch, into the decoding words, and into the phoneme manipulation, which I go into here. So within that first 5 minutes that I had the phoneme manipulation, I did not use Haggerty for this part. I actually went on ChatGPT and I wanted to use words that word chains that they were interested in. Like I wanted this to be a high interest group, and I also, like all the 4 students I had were all at 4 different reading levels. So I wanted to ensure that they were getting word chains at their level. But I did like the same concepts as Haggerty. We would take off the first sound, we would change different letters, we would reverse sounds to make short words, we would blend multisyllabic words, and we would segment them as well. So this builds the ability to hold and manipulate sound sequences. Also during my 5-minute warm-up, this is when I would also do like our RAN practice of timing letters, digits, and high frequency words. So instead of like having letters and numbers, all 4 students were at a different level and all were working on different sight words. So I put the sight words, I had ChatGPT make like a sheet of the sight words they were working on, and then I timed how quickly they could say all those sight words, and then we tried to beat our score every single day of how quickly they could read their sight words within that page. So that was our warm-up that we did every day. Then when we went into our decoding and word work, we really worked on our phonics patterns and recognizing our high frequency words, breaking apart those multisyllabic words, and connecting spelling and pronunciation together, which I still struggle with the connecting and spelling and punctuation part as myself. So we have lots of great comprehensions of how Miss Beth still can't say her words, but she knows what they are on paper. So they found that pretty funny. But this was explicit and systematic practice that helps students to store words in memory through repeated exposures. So like I had one student who was ready to do multisyllabic words, but then I would use multisyllabic words that would have CCBC words within them that my other students could do. So it was kind of like all related together. Yeah. Then after decoding and word work, this was a majority of my practice. So for my fluency practice, I had ChatGPT generate passages for me. Within these passages, I would tell them their Lexile level, which was determined by the reading comp on their Ames web. So I would put in their Lexile level on ChatGPT. I would put in their interest. I would put in the phonics skill we were working on, and then I would put in the sight words that we were working on, and it would generate a passage for me. So all 4 of my students had a different passage that we would read weekly, determined by what phonics and decoding strategy they're working on, sight words, their interest, and their sight words. So that was really interesting because all 4 of my students I had were at different Lexiles determined by the reading comp on Ames Web. So it was tailored specific to their needs. But even though they all 4 had different passages, we still worked on the same skill. So we did repeated readings. I did fluency models with them. We counted how many words we could read per minute after multiple readings, and then we try to beat our score later on. And then that is when we took our passages and we did some comprehension, and this was their favorite part. Like we did a lot of read and recall. Read one sentence, okay? Flip your paper over, tell me what that sentence was. We did a lot of chunking. I would take their sentences and their passages, I would cut it up and make it into puzzles, and they would have to rebuild it. So that chunking also reduced their overload, and then eventually we could increase the number of sentences that they could repeat back to me. By the time my group was done, I think most of my students could repeat at least 3 to 4 sentences back to me, and we started with only having them like repeat half of a sentence or a full sentence. So that was pretty cool. And then I did a lot of graphic organizers. I used Canva for this. Was really fun for my kids. They loved the story maps. We did a lot of cause and effect. We did a lot of the KWL charts as well, with their specific passage. So we would all get the same like graphic organizer, but they would all have different passages and then share their knowledge with each other. So also there was 2 of my friends. I had one student who was in SPED that needed a lot of multi-sensory support. So she needed finger tracking, she would need whispering, she didn't like loud noises. We did a lot of tapping. We did a lot of like writing words while reading them. And then she always needed like a chart like in front of her as well. So those charts were really important to her. So a lot of misconceptions with working memory: it is not brain training apps. It's not random memory games. I mean, we did play memory as fun on Fridays, but like that's not what it is in isolation. It is not isolated digit stand drills with reading comp. So it's not just practicing the RAN assessment over and over and over again. Yeah, I did it as warm up, but it's not that in isolation. So research shows that working memory improves the most when it is tied to reading. So that's why it's really important for us to really take in consideration the students who are at high risk for RAN, so that we can implement some working memory strategies within reading, because within reading is how it improves the quickest. So they were all 3rd graders who were struggling significantly. I was able to use names because I got parent permission from each of these parents, and during parent-teacher conferences. So in the fall, I had Jaden. He has been diagnosed with dyslexia. He scored 8 for ORF and then was 6%. By winter, after my 10-week cycle, he scored 23. He was at 8 percentile. Brandon, he is my tier 3 student. He scored 0, 1 percentile, and then by winter he was 4, 5 percentile. Angela, she's in SPED, so I work closely with the SPED teacher with her. She does have reading minutes on her IEP, but since the SPED teacher was still polling her for her reading group, this was extra during a time that I pulled out that wasn't that tier 1 instruction, so she could still come with me. She improved by 4 percentile. And Bruce, he's EL, he was at 5 percentile and ended up at 9 percentile. Now, ORF, it's really hard to see a big change within ORF right away when they're reading so drastically below, but I wanted to use this just to compare where they were at compared to their peers with the 3rd grade text. Then for listening comp, all of these students scored really low on listening comp. Jaden had 10, Brandon had 13, Angela 5, and Bruce 12. Now this is always out of 16 points. As you can see, all of them improved drastically. Me and the SPED teacher couldn't believe that Angela went from 5 to 12. That was huge. She's really taking in consideration what she's listening and able to hold that into her mind to identify a picture. So that was really nice. Now, these are the scores that I am pretty proud of, not gonna lie. Jaden, he had 178 seconds for RAN at the beginning of the year. I got him down to 142. Brandon, my tier 3, he was at 259. He dropped by 100 seconds at 158. Angela and SPED, she was already pretty quick at 142 seconds, but she did drop down to 114. And then Bruce was a friend who liked to write all of his letters like in reversals or random uppercase letters. And for him, he had all of these bad habits, writing all of his letters the wrong way. So his main focus was rebuilding all of that math work to write his letters correctly. And his EL teacher tells me that now he writes all of his letters correctly without any visual support. So that was the biggest aha, but I think also it goes hand in hand with how he went from 318 seconds to 115. We worked on his working memory and he was able to cut his skill in half in 10 weeks. So that was very rewarding for Bruce. He felt very, very proud of himself. So then, like, what did I do for progress monitoring, right? I did 4 types of progress monitoring. I did the ORF. Like, it's still important for me to see how they're doing to their grade level passages. Even though it's like slow growth, it's still good for them to like know, like, this is where I need to be. Like, this is a 3rd grade passage. I need to be able to read this. Like, I'm just real with them. Like, this is a 3rd grade passage. This is what your peers are reading. This is what you're building up to, so that they can feel that and know that. For their ORFs, I did go on AimsWeb for each one of them. I set up a ORF intervention goal. I determined the ROI on AimsWeb, and I always did, like, I always wanted to close the gap on the side. So sometimes it was ambitious, but sometimes it needs to be ambitious to close the gap when they're in 3rd grade. Then I did a multi-syllabic word accuracy with them. I would come up with 10 to 15 target words. All of these words were in their passages that they were reading for the whole entire week. So if they could identify the words that were in their passage in isolation in a different like context, to see how well they were doing that. So I did that weekly as well. That was a struggle. Like, they could read it within the passage, but as soon as like you isolate the word outside of the passage, that was a struggle for a long time. What really helped with that was the cut up sentences. We would take sentences from their passage, we would cut them up, and then I would have them like mix it up and they would tell me what that word was. That really helped with that word accuracy to try to make those connections. And then I also did sentence recall. That was kind of fun. So, I mean, we did this every day anyways, but like I would say a sentence and they would repeat it back to me. Eventually I would say 2 sentences to see if they could recall that back to me. And I had one student who was almost up to 4 sentences. The third and fourth one got kind of, the first 2 sentences got kind of tricky because they were so focused on the third and fourth, but we were getting there. And then just my tracking. So I did I know we have our progress tracking sheets for SIPs. I kind of made a similar one for each one of my kids. I would write down their reversals, their omissions, where they lost place, where they were forgetting their sentences, and to recognize those patterns so I knew specifically where within their working memory they needed to work on. So then how was this our MTSS aligned? So if a student made growth, which all my students did, they can continue with tier 2. If they did not, we would intensify it to tier 3 after 4 weeks. And then they would move to tier 3 into working memory. So I did not have any friends move into tier 3 with working memory. I just wanted to share real quick some of the fun activities that we did. I said to these first students, I said, okay, I'm gonna present this, what were some of the activities you would like me to share with my friends? And they thought they loved the high interest passages. They loved the high interest word list. I had one student who was really interested in Minecraft. I learned all about Minecraft, I tell ya. But it grabbed his attention and he wanted to do the work. So then I did lots of movement activities. We loved doing a beanbag toss. I would have a word, they would toss the beanbag on top of one of the word parts, and that's the part that we would have to delete out of the word. We would do a lot of recover, retell while standing. We did word reading around the word with those word reading words. We would cut up a sentence, I would put those words around the room, and they would have to go around and find them and write them down and read them. We did a lot of different syllable tapping, stepping, hopping orally. So we did a lot of games. They love fluency trackers. They love fluency trackers so much that me and Carrie decided to do them for all of our students. So now in their binders, they all have a fluency tracker with their goal that was determined for them on Ames Weber FastBridge for our 4th and 5th graders. And when they meet their fluency tracker goal, we get to go grocery shopping for them and spend $5. So I had 2 students yesterday make their fluency tracker goal. So I'm currently buying a lot of Kinder eggs. I don't know if you know what those are, but that's what they want. We did a lot of memory chaining, roll and recall. We did this matchup, the morphology matchup with the prefixes and suffixes. That was really fun. It was putting word together like a puzzle. The students love the draw and dump. So I would just read 2 sentences and they couldn't tell me the sentences back. They had to draw a picture about what those sentences mean. So it took off the barrier of the decoding and just the comprehension. And to draw a picture about that. So these were some of their favorite activities. I wanted to make this meaningful to you guys so that you could leave with one tidbit that you could take back with you and take away with you. So I don't know if you brought your computers, but I thought it would be kind of fun thinking about this if we could go on our diagnostics sheet and if we could together determine our kids who are at high risk of RAM so that we are aware of who those students are. Are we servicing those students? Who are servicing those students for reading intervention? And then just think about maybe what is one thing that you could do moving forward with that student who is at high risk within your intervention to work on that working memory part. So I just thought it would be fun for us to determine who our high risk students are, because I know we all gave RAN, but now let's do something with that data, because RAN turns out I didn't even know what it was at the beginning, and I kind of was I just have to give it. But now I'm realizing that our RAN assessment probably is the most important diagnostic assessment that we give to our students. So I thought we could determine who our high risk students are and maybe just think or collaborate with the ones that are around you about maybe what's one thing that you could implement to support those students who are at high risk. So we wanted to do that for like the next 10 minutes, and then that's all I have for you today. So thanks for listening.